Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So today we are going to talk about eggs and supply and demand. And we're going to kind of branch out from eggs and talk about other forms of supply and demand as well. So, if you don't know, the price of eggs has gone up dramatically in the United States, depending on the source you use, anywhere from, I think it's 62 to like 104%. Big jump in the price of eggs. Now, the industry line, their narrative, their story on why this is occurring is increased demand and avian flu. Does this check out? Yeah. On the surface, yes. Avian flu, it's a thing. It's happening. Okay. They've lost tens of millions of birds, which means less eggs at a time of more demand. Prices go up. Yeah, that tracks. Now, at the same time, there is a group of people who thinks it's a little bit more than that, and they have sent a letter or a complaint to the FTC, and it's kind of alleging price fixing among some of the larger suppliers, artificially inflating the price. Does that check out? I looked, and yeah, there's kind of a discrepancy between the amount of birds lost versus the price increases. Looking at it seems a little bit odd. But to be honest, I don't know enough about the egg industry to make a real judgment on it. That's something that the FTC is going to have to do. Don't expect them to make any kind of comment on it, because they generally don't comment on anything. Okay, so you have a price increase. People don't like those, generally. So there is a ready source of people to be tapped into, to inflame, to provoke, to outrage. And if you can tie it to one of your key issues, that's good politics. Is that happening? Of course. Of course. You have a lot of Republicans right now trying to tie the price of eggs in the United States to the southern border. There is just shock and dismay and outrage from Republicans right now that Americans are going south of the border to buy eggs and then bring them back. Now, something I want to point out before we go any further, avian flu's down there as well. And there are some pretty stiff penalties for bringing eggs back, especially if they're not declared. And they're way more than a carton of eggs. So just maybe that's not the best course of action. But the question is, why is the Republican Party suddenly focusing in on this? This type of thing has been happening for a while with, insulin, people's meds. People will go south of the border to get them because they're cheaper. Why wasn't it brought up then? This isn't a whataboutism. The answer is simple. Demand. Demand. There aren't enough people who have to deal with that. There aren't enough people who need insulin, who live close enough to the border, who see the impacts. It's not true with eggs. More people buy eggs. So this is something that they can tap into. They don't actually care that Americans are in these kinds of financial straits because they don't care about something that is literally required to live. Okay? But there's a demand for it. And because there's a demand for it, somebody's going to provide it. And that's what's happening. And then they're also talking about how there are people who are apparently not doing this for themselves, but doing it for a profit, bringing eggs across the border for a profit. Again, just a reminder, the penalties for that are even more severe. And that brings up something else. Why would people do it? Because there's a demand, right? If there's a demand, the supply will eventually emerge. Maybe since they're kind kind of acknowledging this with this part, with eggs. Maybe it's time to transfer that logic, which is sound, to other things. Rather than advocating for billions and trillions of dollars to be spent on a 60-year failed war, maybe it would be better trying to reduce demand. Especially if you're also currently talking about how much money the U.S. spends on worthless things. The demand exists in the United States. Somebody's going to supply it. Somebody will supply it. When you were talking about drugs, somebody's going to supply it because there's a demand. It's just like eggs. Somebody is going to supply it. If you want to reduce that, you have to reduce the demand. The militarization, all of the stuff that they're advocating, the just draconian sentences, this isn't going to work. It hasn't. We've been doing this for decades, and it's a failure. You have to reduce demand. When we're talking about eggs, and people doing it with eggs, there's not an outcry to severely punish them, right? That's not the Republican stance. The Republican stance is that the government is doing something wrong, because they've got to blame this on Biden. The government's doing something wrong, and we should eliminate the need for people to do this. Reduce demand. Apply that strategy elsewhere. Apply that strategy to places that have just caused just immense amounts of suffering over the years, rather than continuing failure after failure after failure. Shift the strategy. Reduce demand rather than increase militarization. Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good day.